Chapter 19. Violation of Student Conduct Code 653.994.8b. Destruction of campus property. "Turn here," Liam said, skidding to a stop and pivoting right to dash between the mathematics and diplomacy schools. He hoped that the higher stories would hide them from view. Gerald led the way, still in raven form, tilting his wings to make the turn and gliding down the pathway ahead. Liam kept pulling Mitchell up from the rear. Liam's lungs were burning, his throat was raw, his legs were turning to jelly. He imagined Mitchell felt about the same, his face gone pale except for the bright red splotches on either cheek. A caterwaul echoed overhead, a hammer on their eardrums. The frustration in it was plain. They had eluded the manticore so far, but it had not given up the pursuit. They kept running as the walkway between buildings opened up to a wide brick esplanade. The students called this plaza Red Square. It offered no place to hide. On the far side, a set of stairs led down to one of the main traffic arteries through the university. A series of late buses were coming and going at the bus stop. In hopes that perhaps they could hop one of the buses and slip away, Liam tugged Mitchell in that direction. The risk of being spotted was worth it. They began to cross the square. Neither had the breath to speak, but they shared the understanding that the buses were their best chance. Halfway across the square, the manticore spotted them from atop the Arts and Sciences Library. The library was built to resemble a Gothic cathedral. The creature let out another screech. It scuttled along the spine of the roof, knocking over a stone spire before leaping onto one of the flying buttresses. From there, it launched itself down into the plaza, its huge bulk landing with about as much force as a kitten. Even so, the manticore's claws shattered and tore up bricks as it took up pursuit across the square. Its leaps were long, aided by flaps of its leathery wings. "Keep going!" Gerald croaked in his raven form overhead. He snapped back into the shape of a gargoyle, tumbling onto the ground with a less than graceful plop. After rolling, he got up, wobbly, and began to prise a brick free from underfoot. The brick popped free, sending Gerald tottering backward. After a moment, he regained his equilibrium, set his feet, and hurled the brick at the approaching monster. The brick struck the manticore between its eyes. It twisted its body, losing its aerodynamic form and turning off course, keeling over in a dervish of claws, fangs, wings, and tail. "Aha! Right between the eyes," Gerald congratulated himself, pulling up another brick. Liam and Mitchell made it to the stairs, leaping down and rushing along the sidewalk. Liam was thankful again to be in the shadow of a building, in this case the engineering and design building, which might hide them from view as they jumped a bus. The last passengers were climbing on the nearest campus bus. They were painfully slow. Blissfully ignorant of the danger around the corner, none of them moved with urgency. Instead, they stepped forward only when they broke off from their phone screens and earbuds long enough to realize the line was moving. Liam looked back to the steps. Gerald bumped and rolled down them, his legs too short to be much use. He caught himself with flaps of his wings. The manticore couldn't be far behind. They'd never make it on the bus without the creature seeing them. Then everyone would be in danger. "Come on," Liam said, pulling Mitchell again and abandoning the bus. They skirted the vehicle's length, darting around its fender, only to come up short as a second bus blew past honking. If they weren't killed by it, the extra traffic might just hide them. Maybe. In a gap between cars and buses, Liam led Mitchell across the street. They kept running, this time toward the sports complex. Gerald was flapping alongside them again. They came up to the giant, translucent white dome that covered the tennis courts. "In there," Gerald said, pointing to the dome. The nearest doors unlocked and swung open, as if moved by invisible hands. Gerald pushed Liam and Mitchell ahead toward the courts, then snapped his fingers. The doors slammed and locked behind them. Their momentum carried them into the center of the tennis courts, where the three of them finally came to a stop. Equidistant from all the walls and entrances, Liam felt a modicum of safety. At least they had a clear view from all sides and could see anyone or anything coming for them. He and Mitchell collapsed beside the base of one of the referee's chairs, panting. The nefarious-looking spellbooks, decorated with signs and symbols of the occult, waited in their laps. Mitchell reached into his pocket, pulled out his inhaler, and took another long gulp from it. When he let out his breath, he said, "I think I'm experiencing photibob." "Is that a type of asthma attack?" "No," Mitchell said, shaking his head, too tired to say more. He leaned over to the courtside water thermos and shook it. Water sloshed inside. He bent over, put his mouth to the opening, and pressed down the button to drink. When he had his fill, he offered it to Liam. Liam collapsed flat on the ground beneath the tap and let Mitchell pour the last of the water into his mouth. "Photibob, fear of total evisceration by otherworldly being," Mitchell said, as Liam sat up and wiped his mouth. "I guess you got that right," Liam said, clearing the sweat from his face with the end of his shirt. He looked over at the books. "I hope this is all worth it." "We're not home free yet," Gerald said, his face turned upward at the rain shell of the dome. As they watched, the shadow of the manticore circled, descended, and landed. It was as if the spellbook sent out a tracking beacon of some sort. The roof creaked with the weight of the monster, the girders groaning with a load they were never meant to bear. The manticore made its way toward the seam. It was the seam where the roof parted into two halves on sunny days. The creature's claws raked across the outside. The hair stood up on Liam's arms and neck, the noise worse than fingernails on a chalkboard. The manticore circled 2 more times before centering itself above them. Its feet better anchored, it resumed scratching and tearing in earnest. The machinery at the base of the dome let out a crash. The gears, pulleys, and winches were suddenly engaged against their motors. Hydraulic lines burst and high-tension belts snapped to pieces. The manticore was using brute strength to overcome their resistance, and it was winning. The seam opened and a thin strip of starry sky appeared, eclipsed quickly by those glowing azure cat eyes and row upon row of shark teeth. The manticore let out a roar that was part anger, part triumph. Liam and Mitchell covered their ears. Everything around them, tennis nets, water coolers, spellbooks, trembled as if experiencing a minor earthquake. "Maybe we should just give the books back?" Mitchell suggested. "That won't save us now," Gerald said, fluttering upward to regard the growing opening. More stars, more manticore appearing. The demon nodded to the set of doors on the opposite side of the courts. "You all keep going. I'll hold him off." "How?" Liam asked. But in that very moment, Gerald answered. The demon transformed into another impossible creature of his own. This version of Gerald had the oversized and muscular body of a lion, along with the swirling confusion of 3 heads, a snarling lion, an angry-looking ram, and a fire-breathing dragon. "A chimera!" Mitchell cried, the nerd in him not quite completely repressed by the sheer terror of the situation. "Far out!" This chimera had its own set of scaly dragon wings to match the manticore's. Both Liam and Mitchell jumped as the chimera's tail, an actual snake, whipped past them, its cobra head snapping at them. "Whoa," Liam said, his eyes straining to take in the enormity and patchwork of monster parts floating above them. Talk about taxonomic morphology. The chimera scooped at the air with its wings, blasting Liam and Mitchell with a gust of wind as Gerald flew up to meet the manticore. "I guess when life gives you lemons, freeze them in liquid nitrogen and then fire them back at 460 meters per second at whomever is chasing you," Mitchell said, pumping his fist. He looked over at Liam. "What?" "That was so weirdly specific, that's all. Probably too long for a t-shirt." The manticore roared. "Right, less talking, more running," Liam said, grabbing his book. "Right." Mitchell picked up his book and followed. The dragon, the ram, the lion, and the cobra flew upward to meet the manticore. It had opened the roof enough to poke in its head, and it roared out a challenge, causing another sizable trembler. Liam and Mitchell were halfway to the doors when the collision of the 2 beasts shook the building. After a few clumsy swipes from both opponents, the manticore pried open the sky door enough to dive-bomb the tennis courts. But before the manticore could reach them, Chimera Gerald wrapped himself around the beast to keep it from the boys. Both monsters left craters in the tennis courts. The shock waves caused both boys to lose their footing and stumble again. Liam felt as if his ears would bleed from the noise of the roars and that his skin would blister from the heat from the dragon fire, It was as if the creatures were just inches from his back, even if they were 2 courts away. The heat of the dragon's breath set off the sprinkler system. Water rained down. Liam and Mitchell kept moving to the exit. Now it was like running through a tropical downpour. Water was already pooling at their feet. Their clothes were soaked through. They threw themselves into the levers on the exit doors with a crash. Fortunately, the doors were locked only from the outside. The boys passed through and sprinted into the open. They sprinted from heat and humidity into brisk autumn chill. "Wow, that was like moving 25 degrees in latitude in just 20 steps, Mitchell remarked, breathless. Liam was short for words and breath and wasn't about to waste them on discussions of climatology. More roars followed. If all the school security officers and first responders were at Delta House responding to that fire alarm, they were sure to be at the sports complex next. But now, with the opportunity to run while the manticore was distracted, Liam was compelled to do the opposite. He slowed. So did Mitchell. "What will happen to Gerald?" Mitchell asked, speaking for both of them. "I don't know," Liam said, surprised by his own sense of worry and shame at leaving the disagreeable but surprisingly noble demon behind. As they wondered aloud, the monsters smashed through the tennis bubble. They were 2 nightmares emerging from a mythological egg. The combatants blurred into a vortex of lithe, spiraling forms, all flapping wings and gnashing teeth. Where they struck one another, there was no blood, but a vaporous mist fanning into the night air, its edges cracking with sparks. The deeper gouges they made in each other with tooth and nail left smoldering, iridescent crescents in their physical forms. It was hard not to be transfixed, despite the danger. "Ichor," Mitchell said, as if to himself. "What?" "Ichor. It's the substance that allegedly runs through the veins of supernatural beings. It's their lifeblood." Mitchell pointed at the substance spurting out of the creatures. It sank and faded like dispersing fireworks. "Where are you getting all this?" Mitchell shrugged. "Edith Hamilton's mythology. Had to read it in junior high. I guess there's more truth in myth than not." The fight took on the semblance of an erratic dance, spinning the opponents down onto the laboratory sciences building. They corkscrewed about one another, scouring each other's faces, chests, limbs, backs. The monsters crashed into the steel lab chimneys, toppling them off their mounts one after another and sending them rolling down the sides of the building like smokestacks off the Titanic. Chimera and manticore bounced along the building's ridgeline, leaving more craters before dropping off the side and out of view. When Liam said, "Come on," and began running toward where they had fallen, Mitchell didn't wait. He followed. There was no question of it now. Gerald was a member of their team, and they had to know what happened to him. At the front steps of the lab sciences building, Liam and Mitchell skirted around one of the giant metal chimneys where it was still rocking. It had crushed the red-tipped Fotini bushes. The noises of more vicious fighting and more property damage came from the back side of the building. Liam and Mitchell kept close to the outside wall as they circled, still clutching the books and trying to remain as invisible as possible. When they rounded the last corner, they saw that the picnic area behind the lab sciences building had already been destroyed. Tables and benches had been smashed, bent into wild angles that looked more appropriate for a demolition site. Many of the calorie pear trees, already fragile and liable to break in storms, had been uprooted and tossed aside. A rhododendron had caught fire, the flames spreading to a row of forsythia. The monsters parted and circled, still squaring off, each worse for wear. The manticore was down to only one eye, a blazing, hateful blue. Chimera Gerald's snake tail hung broken and limp. It dragged on the ground after him. The ram's head was slashed in so many places, its horns gone, that it looked more like a dead and butchered lamb. The dragon head still spit fire, but both of its eyes had been gouged out. Even as it roared, it was obvious that many of the lion's fangs were broken. The skin on both creatures' wings was rent. Their ferocity was unbated. Perhaps it was even greater. They fought like cornered animals. Chimera Gerald tossed the manticore end over end into the last set of remaining picnic tables. The manticore crashed into a planter of boxwood, then slithered up, counterattacking, snapping with row after row of shark's teeth. The manticore drove Chimera Gerald back, inching him toward the edge of the picnic area, where the ground dropped off from view. The manticore continued, chomping and slashing, a battering ram of razor-sharp edges and lightning-fast limbs. Chimera Gerald held his ground. He shouldered the blinded dragon head downward to absorb the brunt of the attack. The manticore seized on it, slicing the dragon's throat with its claws and mashing down on its face with its teeth. Ichor sprayed and crackled. "Ew!" both boys said, Mitchell adding, "So much for that dragon head." The manticore's victory came at a price, though. Gerald had sacrificed the dragon head so that the lion, with one good eye left, could catch the manticore in its own jaws. The lion held onto the manticore as it struggled to escape. Chimera Gerald also scored such a deep gouge in one of the manticore's forelegs that it looked sure to fall off. Gerald landed 2 more deep scratches with his claws before the manticore kicked back with its hind legs. The kicks freed the manticore and sent Gerald crashing through the hedge. He plummeted down the drop on the far side. Gerald's swift disappearance was followed by the sound of shattering glass. Liam remembered the life sciences building backed up to the lab sciences one. At the foot of the hill below would have been rows of 24 greenhouses. Would have been being the operative phrase, as the noise of Gerald crashing into the greenhouses continued from below them. It had to be a spectacular demolition down there by the sound of it. The manticore was too wounded to press its advantage, much less notice Liam and Mitchell. Free of Chimera Gerald, it took the opportunity to cut its losses and escape. It struggled up into the air, its damaged wings hardly able to keep it aloft. Its flight was lopsided and erratic. Its left wing looked nearly lifeless, the right compensating with extra graceless flaps. The manticore's remaining eye was narrow and bitter with this forced retreat. This encounter ruled a stalemate. The creature nearly careened into the lab sciences building, only correcting its path at the last minute to clear it, low enough that, had any chimneys remained, they would have been knocked over now. But none were left. With another set of wobbly flaps, the manticore was gone. Liam and Mitchell couldn't keep their footing as they ran down the steep hillside to the greenhouses. They both ended up tripping, tumbling, and rolling down the last few feet of the hill, clutching the dearly won spellbooks as they did. At the bottom of the hill, they got to their feet and wobbled over to the rising cloud of dust and debris over where the greenhouses had been. A wide trail of destruction cut through the formerly neat rows of buildings. Glass crunched underfoot as Liam and Mitchell overcame their dizziness and began to jog in unsteady steps, calling out for Gerald as they went. There was no answer. Aside from the destruction, there was no sign of the chimera's bulk and no sign of the scaly, cheese-scented gargoyle. "It looks like a plane crashed into the place," Mitchell said. "But then the plane disappeared into thin air. Gerald, where are you?" They continued to pick their way over the pulverized glass. The air still held a hint of warm moisture from the climate-controlled interiors of the greenhouses. Water misted from broken irrigation lines. The smell of loamy topsoil and tomato plants was strong. They passed through the remains of a half-dozen houses that the chimera must have smashed through. Still no sign of Gerald. "Where could he have gone?" Mitchell said, peeking over his spellbook. "I don't know." "Do you think demons can, die?" Mitchell gulped. "How would I know? You're the one who read Edith Hamilton." A groan, followed by the sound of shifting glass, caught their attention. They pushed past an overturned table of hydroponics, smashing seedlings underfoot, along with other remains of a formerly world-class botany and agriculture department. A second groan led them right to Gerald. Returned to his gargoyle form, he was on his back, rolled up against the far wall. Having passed through the entirety of the greenhouses and destroying hundreds of student projects, Gerald appeared small. Too small to have caused the wide swath of ruined botany experiments. A small avalanche of broken glass slid off him as he let out another moan and tried to sit up. "Gerald!" the boys cried in unison, glass and dirt shifting underfoot as they skidded to a stop next to him. Gerald grunted in response. Even this form bore all the signs of battle. His own wings were crumpled and torn. Many of his scales were missing. Where they had been, a silvery gold eye core was seeping out. Gerald still had both eyes, but one was definitely swelling shut. A number of his smaller horns and spikes were cracked or broken off entirely. "Gerald, are you all right?" Liam asked. "Sure," the demon said with a cough of forced bravado. "Right as rain. Never been better." "You're bleeding ichor," Mitchell stated. "Well, that I am," Gerald said, as if just noticing. "I guess this is a bad time to ask if you can, die from this?" "Well, that is a very interesting question, young Liam. Can a demon who isn't alive in the sense you baryonic mortals are, can such a being experience death? Philosophers have wondered about this for millennia." "A simple yes or no would do," Mitchell said, "so we know to call the demon EMS or something." "Well, we are not exactly mortal like you, but yes, we can certainly cease to be." Are you... Liam was surprised to find himself unable to finish his question. No, but your concern is noted and appreciated. I've had worse." Gerald coughed again. "Just need some time to restore myself to full strength. You boys will have to handle them on your own." "Handle who?" Mitchell didn't get to finish. The beams of campus police officers passed over them, the light reflected 1,000 times over in the jagged fragments of glass. The scattered light illuminated the twisted metal frames, collapsed tables, and crushed vegetation. A rainbow formed at the edge of Liam's vision, as one of the flashlight beams shone through an arch of spray fanning out from a broken hydroponics line. "Come out with your hands up." Liam and Mitchell each rose one hand, still clinging to the spell books with the other. As they mutually realized that possession of these books only further incriminated them, they simultaneously dropped them, Liam all the more eager to do so since there was no telling how easily a giant leathered tome, when held by a mixed-raced boy, might be mistaken by a rent-a-cop for an assault rifle. With both hands up in the air now, they turned to check on Gerald. The demon was gone. The officers approached, greenhouse remnants grinding beneath their feet, walkie-talkies crackling on their belts. Frantic dispatcher voices called out numeric emergency codes as fire alarms, animal sightings, and reports of property destruction proliferated across campus. Beneath it all, Mitchell's voice was mournful as the officers zip-tied them. Twice in 1 week, Liam reflected. But Mitchell wasn't counting. Instead, he leaned close to Liam and whispered, "Poor Gerald. We didn't even get to thank him." Chapter 20. President's Hall. Liam and Mitchell were taken directly to the campus security office, a department they were becoming uncomfortably familiar with. Officer Torres was on duty again, her attempts to take notes on her spiral-bound pad repeatedly interrupted by the ringing of her phone. Liam was glad for it. It gave him time to stall and try to think up some explanation, some story that might get them out of trouble. But he kept coming up blank. Officer Torres' shift partner for the night was Officer Joando, who had a picture of his wife and their 2 daughters on a recent trip to see extended family. It was set on his desk in a Love Indonesia frame. If Joando's assigned role was bad cop, he hadn't gotten the memo. "You boys all right?" he asked, sitting down in a creaking swivel chair, handing them paper cups of water, and offering them both chocolates from the jar on his desk. Mitchell dug right into the candy jar. Liam, while thankful for the water, he was parched after so much running, resisted the urge to take any candy. "You all look like you've been through a lot tonight," Officer Joando said. "When my daughters have had a rough day, I do the same thing we did when I was in the army after a long march. Offer them something cold to drink and something sweet to eat." "Uncle," Mitchell said, his mouth full of mini Mars bars and 3 Musketeers. Officer Joando gave the jar one last tip toward Liam. Liam relented and took a Milky Way Midnight. He was glad he did. The caramel and nougat-filled chocolate was perfect. As Liam chewed, a thin-lipped Torres was saying into the phone, "Yes, sir. Yep, certainly." She looked back and forth between her notepad and Liam. She winced a few times from the screaming on the other end of the call. She held the phone away from her ear, grimacing. Liam couldn't understand the words coming through the earpiece, but he could tell whomever it was, they were irate. The fact that Torres was agreeing or forced to agree with whatever they were saying wasn't good. "You all want some Band-Aids for all those cuts?" Officer Jawando asked. This guy really is more dad than cop, Liam thought. When Mitchell opened his mouth to say yes, Liam was quick to nudge him with his knee and answer for them both. "No, it's all right. We don't need any." Liam's ploy was transparent to Jawando. "You thinking that the guys in President's Hall are going to go easier on you if you're looking banged up?" "Is that where we're going?" Mitchell asked, his mouth open, showing his partly chewed candy. Officer Jawando looked sidelong at Officer Torres, who was holding the phone away from her ear again. "I think that's inevitable. You want to tell me what you were doing at the greenhouses? Because right now, it's not looking good." Liam felt Mitchell staring at him. "I told you. We were just walking past when we heard the noises in the greenhouses. We went over to see what was happening." "And you just happened to find those books that just happened to have been stolen from Delta House, where the fire alarm had been pulled by, let me check my notes here, Captain Phasma and Princess Amidala." "Well, that couldn't be us. I'm dressed as Princess Leia," Mitchell said, reaching for more chocolate. "And you?" Jawando said, looking at Liam. "RoboCop?" Jawando shook his head. He unwrapped a chocolate for himself, rolled the foil up into a ball, and tossed it in the trash can. Mitchell gathered the foil wrappers in his lap and joined the game. Liam struggled to decide if Mitchell was helping or hurting their cause. Mitchell, lifting his arms over his head as he made a basket, certainly wasn't acting like he was guilty. Maybe Mitchell simply had yet to understand the gravity of their situation. After all, Mitchell was white. He might have even been able to skate out of trouble like this before. Who was Liam kidding? Mitchell had never been in trouble like this before. The kid had no idea what was coming. Officer Torres finally clicked off the call. She set down the phone on her desk as if it were physically hot to the touch. She rubbed her temples and let out a long sigh, disturbing the papers on her desk. "You boys haven't changed your story?" she asked, looking to them under her knitted brow. Officer Jawando straightened in his chair, Mitchell too, just as one of his foil balls went wide of the trash can. When Liam couldn't come up with much of a reply beyond a shoulder shrug, Torres shook her head. "Come on then, your funeral." Liam and Mitchell, escorted by Torres and Jawando, were met outside by a giant Samoan man in his early 50s. Samson Light was chief of campus security, and, more interestingly to Mitchell, the former All-American safety who had helped propel Goryeu's football team from obscurity into national stardom. For a moment, Mitchell was a bit starstruck, at least until Samson looked down at them from atop his 6'5" frame and growled, "This them?" "Yes, sir," Officer Torres said, the exasperation and exhaustion in her voice plain. "Let's go, then," Samson Light said, turning his back and walking in the direction of President's Hall. When it was clear Chief Light was not signing autographs and had traded in his celebrity athlete status to commit fully to his role of chief of police, Mitchell looked crestfallen. He followed Light alongside Liam, his chin dropping to his chest. "We're really in trouble, aren't we?" Mitchell mumbled. Now he realizes it. Liam said nothing. He was still trying to concoct a better story for them, but every potential explanation was coming up a dead end. There was just too much evidence working against them. They had been caught with the books. They had been seen escaping from Delta House. The Delta Beta Alphas had filed a report with the campus police claiming the theft of 2 priceless medieval folios. It didn't seem to matter that the books were full of indecipherable occult symbols. White kids with donor parents could keep whatever antiquities they wanted to. The administration was not about to question it. Then there was the trail of destruction across campus. "You don't think they believe we did all that damage?" Mitchell asked Liam. "I don't know, Mitchell, but they obviously think we're connected to it, and without a better way to explain ourselves. You boys had your chance to talk, Chief Light said. You didn't take it. I don't want to hear another word out of you, unless it's the president asking you a question. We are going to see the university president? Mitchell mouthed wordlessly, his face going pale. Liam wanted to swallow the lump forming in his throat. He guessed it to be about the size of a golf ball, but his mouth was suddenly dry. He wished for another cup of water, maybe a cyanide pill too. They walked the length of Concord Quad, once more passing by Harriet Tubman and her upraised chains. This time, instead of turning to the Colgan East building where Aunt Cece's office was, they kept going south, coming to the very end of the quad. After passing Commonwealth Hall on their left, they climbed the steps to the stone terrace set between the grand facade of President's Hall and the statue of Lafayette Concord himself. Their esteemed founder stood on his pedestal, his back to them, peering down the length of the quadrangle which he'd named after himself. The darkness of the night was kept at bay by banks of floodlights shining on him as he surveyed his enduring creation with approval. They entered President's Hall. All the auxiliary offices were closed, dark, and locked. The exception, of course, were the president's offices, which Chief Light steered them to without breaking stride. Mitchell let out an audible gulp. Neither of the boys had their hands cuffed or zip-tied, but they might as well have, with Torres and Jawando escorting them on either side. The lights were off in the reception area. The 3 administrative assistants' desks were all empty. Their owners had left them clean and tidy for the week. Liam was certain this was some unwritten rule. All desks had to be clear at the end of the day. The optics of power, order, and privilege were important, even in off hours. The lights were on, however, in the president's own office. The door hung wide open, but the giant desk inside was empty. It wasn't hard to tell that they were being led elsewhere. Chief Light steered them along toward the row of frosted glass windows that ran the length of a conference room. It was here that a number of figures were gathered. Even the president's office couldn't hold all the people Liam and Mitchell had ticked off that night. Only a boardroom would do. The people inside spoke in quick, clipped murmurs. Chief Light motioned them through the door, and Liam saw there were even more people than he expected. A police lieutenant from the local police precinct, a real cop, stood off to the side at the end of a long conference table. Next to him stood the Dean of Academics, Dean Beyer, a balding man with beady eyes that swam behind thick, round glasses. In the center of it all was President Gerald Dartmouth. Gerald Dartmouth had come to the university after a long stint as a CEO of a private equity firm. Tan, tall, still very fit for his late 50s, with short salt-and-pepper hair and designer clothes, Dartmouth looked far more corporate than the tweed and corduroy-draped deans he often appeared alongside. Even now, with his V-neck sweater vest, non-pleated slacks, and sockless loafers, Dartmouth looked as if he had just come from watching a tennis tournament or sailing on a yacht. Liam half expected him to be holding a martini, single malt scotch, or some other well-heeled cocktail. Dartmouth scowled at Liam and Mitchell. He looked as if he were chewing a mouthful of thumbtacks. These are the Vandals. Vandals. So they were already labeled, already presumed guilty. Liam wondered just how stupid these people could be to believe that 2 undersized, underaged students could wreak such havoc and cause so much colossal damage, knocking over chimneys, trashing picnic areas, burning hedges, uprooting trees, and smashing greenhouses. But maybe it didn't matter. Maybe all they needed were scapegoats, and the fragmented reports of people seeing weird-shaped drones flying over the buildings and crashing into the greenhouses. Liam had pieced as much together from listening to the low, continuous chatter from the officers' walkie-talkies. Maybe that was enough to build a case against us. Liam was surprised and momentarily encouraged to see Jeannie and Esmeralda there. They were sitting off to the side, but after the angry look Jeannie gave them both, Liam reconsidered. He knew they had some serious explaining to do. Jax, however, wasn't there. Liam was glad for that. He didn't want them in trouble, too. Across the table from Jeannie and Esmeralda were a half-dozen department heads, men and women whom Liam only knew by their faces. They were associated with many of the departments affected by the night's battle royale: biology, chemistry, agriculture, etc. A set of footsteps, just on the verge of running, sounded outside the door. Dean Carver, Aunt Cece, entered. She was dressed in a pair of jeans and a leather button-down jacket. Called in from home and arriving in a hurry, Aunt Cece still looked stylish and put together. She drew a single stray lock of hair away from her face, tucking it behind her ear as she noted Liam, Mitchell, Jeannie, and Esmeralda. She looked down the length of the table to President Dartmouth. "Thank you for coming, Carla," Dartmouth said. "Of course. I came as quickly as I could." Even when dressed casually, Aunt Cece spoke with a voice that was steady and professional. "We can get started, then," Dartmouth said. He didn't sit down. Instead, he put his hands on the top of the table and leaned into them. Each hand remained poised on its fingertips. Classic CEO power pose. The department heads stayed seated, while Dean Byer, the police lieutenant, and the campus police who had escorted them remained standing. This was meant to be a quick meeting, then. Whatever their punishment was, Liam knew it had already been decided. What followed would be a mere formality. "Mr. Riley and Mr. Winskull," President Dartmouth began, "I know I speak for all present when I say that I am deeply disappointed. Deeply disappointed really does not even begin to describe the shock, the plain outrage many of us who consider ourselves part of this campus community are feeling tonight. The damage to the campus is in the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. The loss of experiments, the destruction of what represented the knowledge and effort of so many fellow students, it is impossible to measure." Dartmouth paused, as if to let his words sink in, before looking over in the direction of the real cop. Liam knew this meant trouble. Dartmouth continued, "The reckless disregard for municipal laws regarding the use of drones will lead to not only fines, but a loss of trust and respect from our off-campus neighbors." What a shame, Liam thought, as if the neighbors didn't already mind the late frat parties, the vomit on their sidewalks, or solo cups blown into their yards every Friday through Sunday morning. "It has also been an affront to our campus values, as you conspired to steal property from one of the oldest, most esteemed fraternities on campus." Liam winced. Oh, here it comes, the poor victimized Delta frat. "The explanations I will have to offer to the governing board, the town council, the Delta parents, many of whom are alums and generous donors." Dartmouth stopped. He was not at a loss for words. He was only pretending to be, for effect. "It is staggering to contemplate all the offended parties." Dartmouth's eyes drifted off Liam and Mitchell to focus on nothing in particular in the far corner of the room. It was as if Dartmouth were imagining the many explanations and conciliatory meetings that waited for him in his immediate future. Dartmouth's focus snapped back. Liam felt every set of eyes on them, save perhaps Esmeralda's. But it was the look on Aunt Cece's face that was the hardest to meet. Liam read a level of disappointment that bordered on painful for her, not to mention a bewilderment that was impossible for her to hide. "Are you two still insisting on this fabrication of a story you already shared with campus security?" Dartmouth asked, tilting his head at Liam and Mitchell, his eyes drilling holes in them. Liam didn't see what they had to lose at this point. He was beginning to feel the weight of guilt. It was like a bucket of cement tied to his neck. Guilt for what this might mean for Aunt Cece, guilt for roping Mitchell into this at all. Shamefaced, cowed, his eyes glistening, Mitchell wasn't going to speak up for them. He was already wringing his hands in a fruitless effort to stop their shaking. Mitchell also had a deep cut on his forehead that was still bleeding a bit. Liam felt doubly bad for his stupid refusal of Band-Aids. I am such a toenail, Liam thought, before his resolve broke altogether. We took the books. It was my idea. Mitchell was against it, but I talked him into it. I said it was just a prank, like frats pull on each other all the time, Liam said. You are not a frat, Dartmouth said. His answer surprised Liam. It seemed to imply that if Liam had been in a frat, he might possibly be excused. This wasn't lost on Esmeralda either. "So the Frats are allowed to get away with mischief?" she asked, the last word coming out as mischief in her sing-song accent. "Misbehavior is sanctioned on campus if you are a member of a Greek organization?" Esmeralda's tone was genuinely curious, less their defender and more a foreigner perplexed by the unwritten rules of a different country. But as the defense went, Liam would take it. He could have hugged her, but another part of him wanted her to stop. It was bad enough that Mitchell might take the fall for him. Liam didn't want Esmeralda in trouble, too. Dartmouth cleared his throat and straightened. "Of course not. Our campus rules apply to everyone just the same. To even imply otherwise is ridiculous." Dartmouth said this, even if no one believed it. Frats got away with infractions all the time, their indiscretions frequently dismissed with the old saw, "Boys will be boys." Case in point, the lack of any punishment of the Delta brothers for the fight in McSmiley Rec Center. That fight wasn't far from Dartmouth's mind either. He referenced it next. "This rash of unacceptable behavior on your part from otherwise good students, it is inexplicable to me. Mr. Winskull, you are one of our most promising Lambeth students." Another pause as Dartmouth looked at his hands, then turned to Liam. "And Mr. Riley, after all the university has done for you, to accommodate your father's last wishes." Rage began to vibrate in Liam's chest. It radiated up and outward, into his shoulders and down the length of his arms. He balled his fingers, digging his nails into his palms. Something about the way Dartmouth talked about his father, as if Tom Riley had not dedicated every day of his life to the university for a longer time and in a much more humble position than President Gerald Dartmouth ever had, and Tom Riley's last wishes, bequeathing all he had, even his son, out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to the university he loved, for all that to be treated as if it were some sort of inconvenient burden. Liam began to see red with each growing beat of his heart. "Carla, I know you must share my own profound disappointment," Dartmouth said, now mounting a strategic strike at the only bond of family Liam had left in the room, left in the world. Dartmouth was trying to railroad Aunt Cece into a corner where she would be forced to denounce Liam. Dartmouth's use of Aunt Cece's first name irked Liam further. No one, none of her friends at least, called her Carla. Waiting for Aunt Cece's response, Liam bit his tongue. Aunt Cece's throat fluttered, even as she put on an outward face of resolve, but Liam could detect a tear at the corner of her eye. "This has been upsetting, yes." Aunt Cece's voice was guarded, enough for Liam to understand how angry she was. As a black woman, she was not afforded the same latitude in expressing it, though. But like Esmeralda, Aunt Cece's tone, her expression, betrayed an additional sense of confusion, concern even, for this process and the many questions yet unresolved. Unfortunately, Aunt Cece had little leverage in this moment. Dartmouth's casual use of her first name had no doubt been meant to imply that. Already on probation, Liam knew he had put his aunt in a lose-lose bind. And for that, Liam felt an additional weight of remorse. It added to the bucket of guilt cement he already felt tugging on him. Liam just wanted to go home to Aunt Cece's, where he should have agreed to go in the first place. If he lived there, none of this would have happened. He would have never met Gerald, Mitchell, Jeannie, Jax, or Esmeralda. Maybe he wouldn't have even been allowed to fool with the DMA. Would that have been so bad? It seemed like fooling around with that damned DMA was what had caused Gerald to show up in his workshop. His dad's workshop. That was where all this had started. Why couldn't Liam have left the past alone? Remorse turned into a sense of loss for his parents that Liam had rarely let himself feel. Now his eyes felt watery and full. He set his rows of teeth hard against one another in an effort not to cry. He couldn't let these administrators, rent-a-cops, and real cops see him break. Dartmouth was still talking. "I don't even know how they could cause such destruction, just the two of them, but with such talented students, their potential for success is likely only matched by their potential for great failure." Liam half expected Aunt Cece to use this as an opening to argue for their potential as students, but it was Jeannie who spoke up instead. "They might be giants," Jeannie said, standing and stepping away from her seat. The room turned to her. It was the first thing Jeannie had said since Liam and Mitchell had been marched in. Too bad it was a complete non sequitur, the silly, inappropriate remark of a kid who the adults in the room were ready to ignore. But then Esmeralda added, "Nothing like that record since 1990. Liam wondered what the hell they were talking about. Mitchell stood up a bit straighter, the descent into the absurd on the part of his cousin and friend catching his attention. What record was Esmeralda referencing from 1990? None of the Lambeth kids had ever been alive then. No one else seemed to know either. The professors, department heads, and assorted officers looked to one another, equally confused. But Jeannie and Esmeralda being kids, the adults didn't bother to ask them. The profs and deans cleared their throats instead, waiting for the awkwardness to pass, or for someone else, other than them, to put these kids in their place. "I'm sorry, it's just a flood of emotions right now," Jeannie said, one hand over her heart, another touching the corner of her eye to wipe away a tear in what, to Liam, was a terrible bit of acting. Esmeralda followed, committing in full to the melodrama. She put her arm around her friend, turning to face the adults in the room, even if her blind eyes could not see them. "My friend Jeannie here, she's actual size," she offered by way of explanation. The others in the room were willing to write this last phrase off as, perhaps, the consequence of English as a second or third language. They nodded and made the appropriate noises of sympathy. Except for Mitchell, whose eyes began to blink rapidly, as if something was clicking together inside his head. Dartmouth seemed ready to move on. He spoke over the two girls. "Mr. Riley and Mr. Winskull, you've cast a stain over the students of Lambeth House and the whole Running Start scholarship program. That in itself should cause you shame, especially in light of all that has been given you." There it is, Liam thought. He had expected the dose of white paternalism sooner, really. That they had made it this far without the implication that Liam had not been a grateful enough Negro was surprising. President Dartmouth let out a long sigh as he finally leaned away from the table, his hands rolling on their wrists, palms facing upward, as if surrendering control. He was Pontius Pilate washing his hands of it all. "But as the residents of Delta Beta Alpha are pressing criminal charges of trespass, larceny, and breaking and entering, I am happy to report their property has been returned. This is now a municipal issue rather than a campus one. I am forced to turn you boys over to Lieutenant Rank here." Lieutenant Rank, the lantern-jawed cop with a precisely cut beard, narrow waist, and a bench presser's chest, stepped forward. The campus police, with their tasers and pepper spray, looked to be playing dress-up in comparison to Rank's holstered pistol, his bandolier of spare clips, and his shiny nightstick. Rank didn't hesitate to dangle out 2 sets of handcuffs, bend down, and click them into place around Liam and Mitchell's wrists. "As you are both minors," Dartmouth went on, "I understand you will be taken to a detention center for youth your own age." That was enough for Aunt Cece to finally speak out against what was going on. "Jerry," Aunt Cece said, in her own power play, using Jared Dartmouth's first name, the diminutive even. "Surely the boys can be placed under house arrest until a trial." "This is no longer our jurisdiction, Carla," Dartmouth cut her off, "and with all the PR efforts we will have to engage in with the affected stakeholders, it's probably best we don't run the risk of being seen as giving these two special treatment." "But they deserve special treatment. You said it yourself. They are minors. They are children," Aunt Cece said, her voice taking on an edge. Dartmouth waved her concern aside with a shake of his hand. "I understand these detention facilities are quite well equipped. I hear it's really no different than summer camp." "With all due respect, President Dartmouth, those facilities," Aunt Cece started, but was cut off again, this time by Lieutenant Rank. They're perfectly safe, I assure you, Lieutenant Rank said, placing a heavy hand on Liam and Mitchell's shoulders. He started marching them back around the conference table toward the door. Rank's size and strength was overpowering. Liam felt himself left with no choice but to stumble forward or likely be picked up bodily. But it was the 3 campus officers who moved to interfere, perhaps out of some infringement on what they saw as their jurisdiction. Maybe it was just a sense of professional rivalry. Whatever the case, Chief Light, Officer Torres, and Officer Joando remained in place, blocking the exit. Only Chief Light was tall enough to look down on Lieutenant Rank, whose half-smile exposed a gold incisor tooth. He returned Light's glare in what was fast becoming a weird cop versus rent-a-cop standoff. We are perfectly able to watch the children and keep them safe, in custody, on campus, Chief Light said. It's a municipal issue now, Chief Light, President Dartmouth repeated. You may stand down. Lieutenant Rank's smile grew, exposing a bit more of that gold tooth. But if there was someone who was determined not to sit quietly, it was Jeannie. She leapt, crossed the room, and seized Mitchell by the earlobe. Ow! Mitchell squirmed, but Jeannie's pinch was unrelenting. She bent his ear even further. I can't believe you, Mitchell. Aren't you the guy? The guy who always told me we'd succeed together, side by side? That we were like twins? Who are you now, my evil twin? What are you going to do? Leave me twisting? To make her point, Jeannie wrenched Mitchell's ear further so that he blurted out, Jeannie, please stop! But as he opened his mouth, Jeannie clamped her own hand down across it. Mitchell's eyes bulged for a second, like he was about to choke. Don't say a word. Not now. Not yet, Jeannie seethed, looking him dead in the eye. I don't want to hear it. I'll listen to you later, not now. You understand? Jeannie ripped her hand away and held a rigid finger in her cousin's face. Mitchell obeyed, snapping his mouth shut and nodding. Where your eyes don't go, Jeannie said, waving her finger. Liam wondered if this was some reference to Esmeralda, who was standing up from her chair and tapping her way over to Jeannie. They'll need a crane to fix all that damage. Esmeralda shook her head, coming alongside Jeannie. Even if they had not been dismissed, Esmeralda and Jeannie looked to be dismissing themselves. All right, enough of this. Let's get a move on, Lieutenant Rank said, plowing past Jeannie and Esmeralda. But he still had to stop before the 3 campus officers who finally relented, Torres and Joando following Chief Light's lead, but not until all 3 had taken a further beat to stare daggers at Rank. In the dim hallway outside, Rank kept Liam and Mitchell marching at a quick clip, as if he were in a hurry to get them out before the administration changed their mind. Liam looked around, wondering if this was the last time he'd ever be on campus. Mitchell's attention was fixed on the floor ahead of them. What the heck was all that about, with you and Jeannie? Liam asked. But by all signs, Mitchell was sticking with his cousin's injunction. He kept his mouth shut and his head down as they continued out the door and down the steps. They passed through the shadow of their illustrious founder, his back forever turned on them as they turned away from the quad and approached the waiting squad car. Part 3. Concertina. Chapter 21. Rest Stop. Lieutenant Rank put Liam and Mitchell in the back of his squad car. Aside from the brief stints when the campus security officers had put them in zip ties, this was Liam's first real experience of having his freedom stripped away by degrees. The back seat of the squad car reinforced the message of powerlessness. With no handle to open the door from the inside, plexiglass between themselves and the front seat, and legroom that was cramped even for 2 boys, everything about the design conveyed that their comfort was far down on the list of priorities in this space. The back seat itself was featureless and without seams. It was a bland, mass-produced blue color, which was likely identical to thousands of other mass-produced seats in mass-ordered police vehicles. They were now in the belly of a faceless institution that saw them as the same, but not quite the same. Liam's eyes were drawn back to Lieutenant Rank's sidearm again and again. He was aware of the undeniable statistics that young men with his skin color, educated or not, were 10 times more likely to be shot and killed by police than their white counterparts. Liam had seen enough YouTube videos to know how these things went, and he wasn't sure if Mitchell's complexion protection would extend to them both. Probably not. They left the familiar grounds of the university, driving under the arch of the West Campus gate past boxwoods Liam's father had planted. As he watched the Goryu sign recede, the knots in Liam's stomach only grew more painful, the tremors in his limbs worse. They were outside the bounds where Liam was known, where his father had worked, where his mother had been on scholarship. Now he was just another black juvenile delinquent, a troubled youth, a thug, maybe even a super predator, depending on who was doing the labeling. The thought of it made him shrink inward further with shame. His parents would be so disappointed. At the police station, Rank handed them over to pairs of other officers, each set bigger, meaner, and lower ranking than the last. Liam actually found himself missing the campus police officers like Torres Jawando, even Chief Light. These beefy cops took Liam and Mitchell's fingerprints without wasting any friendly words on them to smooth the process. Liam and Mitchell had to wait for what felt like eternity as these officers hunted and pecked keys on their keyboards to enter the boys' personal information. Next, they ordered the boys to empty their pockets so the officers could inventory their belongings. When that was finished, the officers led them farther back into the station, through a maze of gates and dark hallways that reeked of man sweat and mold. The industrial-strength bleach used to clean the prisoner area had failed to remove the stench, but it certainly burned Liam's nose and eyes. As they walked, his head throbbed, as if his temples were locked in an ever-tightening vise. They came to a large room where an officer sat at a desk. In between reviewing pages in a 3-ring binder, the officer glanced at a series of small TV screens that cycled through the dozens of angles into various cells. He nodded at Liam and Mitchell's escort, but didn't say a word. The cells were on the other side of a cinder-block wall with reinforced glass windows. Their escort officer unlocked a heavy door, ushering Liam and Mitchell through to where the bars of their cell waited. After letting the door lock behind them, their escort officer pulled out a set of keys. He unlocked the bars, swung them open, and this last time ushered the boys forward without following them. This was the end of the line. Liam and Mitchell had no choice but to enter the tiny space. The bars slammed shut behind them. The keys turned, the locks engaged, the officer opened the outer door and left. The thick, reinforced door bolted into place after him with a heavy, final, muffled thud. A black globe on the ceiling was all Liam and Mitchell needed to know they were being watched. The 2 beds were more like benches with rubber mats across them. All their beams and footings were heavy, oversized, and reinforced, as not to be broken free and used as weapons. A stainless steel toilet and sink unit waited in the corner. A narrow gap in the wall, close to the ceiling, would have let in a narrow bar of light if it had been daytime. Instead, a harsh fluorescent light hummed overhead. Its glow was barely softened by the butter beige walls that brought to mind the color of stomach bile. Neither of the boys said much. Mitchell was still silent, but the fear on his face spoke volumes. Maybe he was feeling the same shame and anxiety Liam was, or maybe Mitchell's was different, as he still had parents to be angry at him over all this. Whatever the case, they both kept their thoughts to themselves, curling up on the bunk beds with nothing to do but wait. Maybe it was the sense of being watched. Maybe it was just the stress and intimidation of being incarcerated and the ignorance as to what might be next, but Liam and Mitchell remained quiet long after lights out. Mitchell did mumble in his sleep. It was mostly nonsense, with the occasional reassurance of, "It's okay, it's going to be okay," when he was semi-awake. Liam wasn't even certain which of the 2 of them Mitchell was trying to comfort, nor did Liam do a good job of stifling his own sniffles. Time didn't pass like it did on the outside. They didn't have their watches or their phones. There were no clocks visible. Their time was marked in intervals distinguished by the delivery of their meals and the changing of the guards outside, who all looked the same with their buzz cuts, football player builds, and mean faces. 2 days passed. After the third night, when the window was just beginning to lighten with dawn, Lieutenant Rank returned. They had just cleared their trays of breakfast. Rank was holding 2 clear plastic bags of their belongings, with their names written on the outside. "Come on, transfer time." The bars unlocked, the outer door too. Liam and Mitchell followed Rank, heads down, shoulders pinched. Neither of them had slept well in the past 3 nights. Liam felt groggy and lethargic. Mitchell shuffled slowly, sweating as if feverish. Into Rank's squad car again. It was Monday morning. Even this early, the police CB was noisy with codes, location reports, and calls, few of which Liam understood. "Where are we going?" Mitchell asked. "You'll see when you see," Rank said. Liam would have left it at that, but Mitchell pushed up against the plexiglass. "What is your badge number, Officer Rank? I'd like to know." Complexion protection. 000, shut the hell up. That's my number. Now sit down before I force you to. Mitchell flopped back onto the seat and stared sullenly out the window. They gathered more information as to their destination when a call came over the CB. Rank picked up the speaker piece to respond. "Unit 159, en route to transfer 2 minors to detention center, rendezvous at milepost 286. "Copy 159. In a few minutes, as they pulled up to it, Liam and Mitchell could see milepost 286 was a state rest stop on the interstate. Road signs indicated it offered public bathrooms, road maps, snack machines, and picnic tables. The exit ramp, however, was blocked by 2 state police cruisers, their lights flashing, indicating that the rest stop was, for whatever reason, closed. To the public, at least. The state police officers waved Lieutenant Rank through so he could speed up to the empty parking lot on the side reserved for trucks and RVs. Rank rolled to a stop, put the cruiser into park, but left the engine running. They waited. Before long, Liam heard the low rumble of diesel engines. Mitchell shifted in his seat to look out the window, mumbling, "Purple toupee." "What?" Liam asked before Lieutenant Rank said, "Both you, shut up." Liam wasn't sure if Mitchell was speaking in code or just losing his mind. He realized he didn't know Mitchell that well, and perhaps this gibbering was a dissociative response from stress and anxiety. Why had he ever gotten the poor kid involved with all this? 3 late-model charter buses rolled up into the parking lot, slowed, and came to a stop, one lined up close behind the other. The door to the first bus opened, and a massive giant of a man in a uniform that was part SWAT team, part private security firm stepped off. His shoulders barely fit through the width of the door. He had to be close to 7 feet tall. The bus shifted on its shocks when he stepped off. This giant man's eyes were hidden behind mirrored aviators. His skin was reddish-brown, as if in the process of turning from serious burn to a tan. His jaw, too big for his face, was chomping down on a toothpick that looked like a splinter in his mouth. What do they feed these dudes? Liam wondered. "Come on," Rank said, getting out and opening the door to the back seat. When the giant descending from the bus saw Rank, he bared his teeth around the toothpick. Liam guessed it was what passed for a smile. Lieutenant Rank, for all his size, was a man in miniature next to him. As Rank led them over, a bedraggled line of young men and boys started down off the first bus. Thick steel chains linked their feet and looped their hands together. They were locked into gangs of 6, each set containing boys in a full range of sizes and ages, from what looked like as young as 4 to as old as 16 or 17. Liam guessed this mixing of ages and sizes in each grouping was intended to make it harder for any chain gang to try to make a run for it. Not that any of the boys looked ready to. They were some of the most sorrowful, gaunt, and bleary-eyed kids Liam had ever seen. Their eyes had dark bags beneath them. The littlest boy's eyes were puffy and red, as if they had been crying throughout the night. They spoke exclusively in Spanish. Although Liam didn't know Spanish, he could tell the oldest boys were most concerned with the youngest ones, and not about escaping. The bigger boys instructed the intermediate-sized ones to adjust the chains and stagger their strides to let the smallest boys keep up without tripping. They were uniformly skeletal, their skin dry from sun exposure, their hair askew from sleeping all night on a bus. As more and more stepped off and headed to the bathrooms, Liam realized they were all Latino. "Morning, Lieutenant Rank," the giant in aviator said over the idling of the bus engine. "Officer Trey, I got 2 more for you," Rank said with a nod in Liam and Mitchell's direction. "Well, that you do." Officer Trey looked down at Liam and Mitchell as if from a castle tower. Liam read the patch on his chest. Cerberus Private Security Ltd. "Got room?" Rank asked. "Always got room." Liam and Mitchell watched as the boys in the chain gangs cycled through the bathroom. As they returned, they said nothing to Liam and Mitchell, barely making eye contact with either of them. Once all the Latino boys were back on the bus, Officer Trey shut the door. As the 2 officers walked down the length of the first bus, Rank directed Liam and Mitchell to follow. The next bus opened, and now the same process unfolded, only this time with chain gangs of Latina girls. Like the boys, their ages ranged from primary school to teens. They were as guarded and weary-looking as their male counterparts. They only spoke when necessary and only in Spanish. As with the boys, the older girls helped the younger ones to move along. They made even more effort than the boys not to make eye contact, if that was possible. "You got them whipped into shape," Lieutenant Rank said, observing the lines of girls moving with terrified efficiency. "Whipped is right," Officer Trey chuckled. "It's what we do best." The girls' bathroom break over. Trey and Rank moved Liam and Mitchell down to the 3rd bus. The driver inside, another man in aviators and a Cerberus private security uniform, pulled the lever so that the door shook open with a hiss of leaky hydraulics. The children who emerged were not chained together. It would have been overly cumbersome and unnecessary, for all these children, at first all girls, then boys, were all single, even double, amputees. These children moved using crutches and canes with worn padding, taped stems, and cracked handles. Some children wore braces that looked to be World War I era. Liam watched in a sort of cold horror. It seemed the height of injustice that even children facing such a lot in life would be detained. But if these kids were accustomed to special treatment, they didn't show it. They moved in a hurry to the bathrooms, no slower than the kids with intact limbs, as if long adapted to their physical limitations, and certain that any punishment for tardiness would be severe. Since the amputee girls were followed by amputee boys, Liam guessed the boys had been sitting in the back of the bus. A few able-bodied kids, male and female, were among the maimed children. The able-bodied ones carried the children with no legs on their backs. Again, like all the other children on the other buses, these children had Latinx features and spoke only in snippets of Spanish. Liam knew they all had to be migrant kids, traveling alone or separated from their parents at the border. "What happened to these kids?" Mitchell whispered. "You'll shut your mouth if you don't want to end up like them," Rank said. Officer Trey let out a bark of a laugh that settled into a part grunt, part growl. Rank's chest swelled from Trey's approval. When the last of Trey's chuckling died down, he added in a deep, rumbling voice, "Why don't you boys get on the bus? Listen to the lieutenant here. Sit down and shut the hell up." Liam and Mitchell obeyed, stepping onto the steep black stairs of the bus, Liam unsure if the shaking he felt throughout his limbs was from the vibrations of the engine or his rising terror.